Okay, this video specifically discusses the cultural flowering that accompanied the Tudor dynasty. While some mark the end of the English Renaissance with the death of James I, who followed Queen Elizabeth on the throne, the more common end date is 1603, which is the date of Elizabeth's own death. It was during the reign of Elizabeth that the continental poetic structures that began to assert themselves during her father's reign came to dominate English literature, with the sonnet, which came from Italy, and traditional classical modes such as the pastoral and heroic modes flowering in poetry, and the emergence of the greatest period ever seen in English drama, with with Thomas Kidd, Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, and John Webster, and above all, William Shakespeare, producing a flood of theatrical texts. As a matter of fact, it is estimated by some historians that as many as 50 million trips to the theater were made during Elizabeth's reign, which is a phenomenal amount considering the population. The Elizabethan court proved a great patron of the arts. Indeed, many of the greatest poets that have been preserved for us were courtiers. Furthermore, as the theaters grew and bloomed, they sought and received patronage from the court and nobility, and this allowed them to work professionally as actors and playwrights, who made their even though they made their primary income by selling tickets from the public, their status as technical servants of some lord or other prevented their being arrested under laws that would have said what they do is not a real job. While the drama of Shakespeare towers over the period, there were many tremendous writers, including Sir Edmund Spenser, Sir Walter Raleigh, and Sir Philip Sidney. Spenser wrote the great romantic epic of the age, The Faerie Queene. Sir Walter Raleigh was famous for many different things, including his series of sonnets, and Sir Philip Sidney wrote, among other things, a famous defense of poetry in which he argued that only literature, only poetry, seeks to take the world not just as it is, but to make it better and to inspire us to move into a better world. The medieval theater of the church and guilds had largely passed away with the reforming efforts of Henry, Edward, and Elizabeth, although a few cities still see mystery play cycles into the 1570s. But before this was eliminated, the baton had been passed, and we saw a tremendous humanist transformation that sees drama reach out to embrace all avenues of human experience and interest. And it moved far beyond staging moral allegories or humorous reinterpretations of biblical narratives. The English proved less tied to neoclassical formal doctrines than their continental contemporaries, especially in drama. And while they embraced the various classical modes, such as Edmund Spenser's embrace of the heroic mode with the Faerie Queene, or Marlowe's use of the pastoral in some of his poetry, Ben Jonson embraced Aristotle's unities in working with his comedies. Generally speaking, while they were aware of them, the Elizabethans were happy to combine these elements in creations of their own, and were not as tied to these neoclassical, as doctrinaire in their interpretations of classical models. The Elizabethans particularly loved ornament. They were famous for their fancy clothes. I mean, take a look at this outfit that we see Elizabeth wearing here, and the embroidery and the jewelry, the stiff lace collar, all of it. And their literary language reflected this love of splendor. Their embrace of rhetoric in the grammar schools and the universities, especially rhetoric as training for speech, meant many of their writers transferred the hundreds of classic figures of speech known as topoi into their literary workings, making elaborate use of traditional phrases similes, etc. Further, the Elizabethans as a whole loved pattern and symmetry, appreciating the beauty of surfaces that future generations would question, challenge, and desperately try to get beneath. Thus, Shakespeare's famous verbosity, his wordiness, reflects the time and values of his age. A wizard of verbal ornament, Shakespeare's elaborate mastery and manipulation of these traditional figures of speech, his stunning ability to stretch and enliven images, similes, and metaphors, and his surface adherence to various patterns that appear formulaic in lesser hands mark him as the paramount Elizabethan literary artist.